At my son's birthday, my mother announced, "We're not acknowledging him as family." I'd been funding her boutique for 3 years. Monday morning, she found the locks changed and an eviction notice. I never thought I'd be writing this, but here we are. I'm 34, married to my wonderful husband Jake for 8 years, and we have a 7-year-old son named Arthur. This story is about how my mother's cruelty at my son's birthday party finally pushed me over the edge, and how I made sure she faced the consequences of her actions. To understand what happened, I need to give you some background about my relationship with my mother, Linda. She's 58, divorced from my father when I was 12, and has always been what you might call particular about appearances and social status. Growing up, she made it clear that image was everything. The right clothes, the right friends, the right achievements. Nothing I did was ever quite good enough, but I kept trying anyway. When I got married to Jake, Mom wasn't thrilled. Jake's a wonderful man, works as a high school teacher, coaches the baseball team, and is the most genuine person I know. But he's not what my mother would call ambitious in the financial sense. He's passionate about education and making a difference in kids' lives, which doesn't exactly translate to the six-figure salary my mother thought I deserved in a husband. The criticism started early. Are you sure he can provide for you properly? Teaching doesn't exactly set you up for early retirement. Maybe he should consider a more lucrative career path. I defended Jake constantly, but Mom's disapproval was a constant undercurrent in our relationship. Things got worse when Arthur was born. Jake and I were over the moon, of course. Arthur was this perfect little baby, with Jake's dimpled smile and my stubborn streak. But Mom's reaction was complicated. She seemed happy enough when other people were around, posting photos on Facebook and playing the doting grandmother. But privately, she made little comments that stung. "He's going to need a college fund, you know? Teaching salaries won't cover that. I hope you're planning to give him more opportunities than his father had. Children from single-income families often struggle academically. It was death by 1,000 cuts. These constant implications that Jake wasn't good enough, and by extension that Arthur was somehow disadvantaged because of his father. The real trouble started 3 years ago when Mom decided she wanted to open a boutique. She'd always been interested in fashion and claimed she had a natural eye for style. She found this perfect little storefront downtown and came to me with a business proposal. "Sweetheart, I know you and Jake have been doing well with your marketing business," she said. We were having lunch at her favorite upscale cafe, and she had that tone she used when she wanted something. "I've found the most amazing opportunity. This boutique space just opened up on Main Street, right in the heart of the shopping district. I should mention that my freelance marketing business had really taken off over the previous few years. I specialized in social media strategy for small businesses and had built up a solid client base. Jake and I were comfortable, not wealthy, but we could afford our mortgage, save for Arthur's education, and take a nice vacation once a year. The thing is," Mom continued, "I need some initial investment. Just to get started. The lease deposit, initial inventory, some basic renovations. Nothing too major." She quoted me a figure, $15,000. It was a significant chunk of our savings, but not devastating. And honestly, I was excited about the idea of my mom finally pursuing something she was passionate about. Maybe this would make her happier, more fulfilled. Maybe she'd finally stop making those cutting remarks about Jake's career. "I'll pay you back within the first year," she promised. "Once the business gets established, you'll see returns on your investment. This is going to be huge." Jake was hesitant when I brought it up to him that evening. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "15,000 is a lot of money. And your mom? Well, she doesn't exactly have a track record with business ventures." He was right. Over the years, Mom had started and abandoned various projects. The jewelry making phase, the real estate license she never used, the online resale business that lasted 3 months. But this felt different. She seemed more committed, more serious. "She's my mother," I told Jake. "And if this works out, maybe she'll finally be happy. Maybe she'll stop." I didn't finish the sentence, but Jake knew what I meant. Maybe she'd stop making us feel like we weren't good enough. So I wrote the check. $15,000 from our savings account, handed over with a hug and wishes for her success. The boutique, Linda's Collections, opened 6 months later. It was beautiful, I'll give her that. She had good taste, and the store was elegant and well curated. But within 3 months, she was back asking for more money. "Just a temporary cash flow issue," she explained. "Retail is seasonal, and I need to bridge the gap until the holiday shopping season kicks in. 5,000 should do it." This time, Jake was more vocal in his objections. "This wasn't part of the original plan," he said. "She promised she'd be self-sufficient after the initial investment." But Mom had an answer for everything. The economy was tough. Small businesses always struggled in the first year. She just needed a little more time to build her customer base. And there was always that underlying implication that if we didn't help, we were being selfish. Family helps family, right? So I gave her another 5,000. Then 3 months later, it was 4,000 for new inventory. 6 months after that, another 3,000 for marketing expenses. Each time, she promised it would be the last time. Each time, she had a perfectly reasonable explanation. And each time, Jake grew more frustrated while I felt more trapped between my husband and my mother. The worst part was that despite all the money we'd invested, Mom's attitude toward Jake and Arthur never improved. If anything, it got worse. She seemed to view our financial support as validation that we could afford to help her because my business was successful, but she still treated Jake like he was somehow inadequate. At family gatherings, she'd make pointed comments about how some people are content with modest aspirations while looking directly at Jake. She'd talk about Arthur's future in terms that suggested he needed to overcome the limitations of his father's profession. She'd praise my business success while simultaneously dismissing Jake's contributions to our family. Jake, being the patient man he is, mostly just took it, but I could see it wearing on him. He'd come home from family dinners quiet and withdrawn. Once, I found him sitting in Arthur's room just watching our son sleep, and when I asked what was wrong, he said, "I just want to make sure he never doubts that he's loved exactly as he is." That broke my heart. My mother's constant criticism was affecting not just Jake, but potentially Arthur too. A 7-year-old shouldn't have to grow up feeling like his father isn't good enough. By this point, I'd given my mother a total of $27,000 over the course of 3 years. $27,000 from our family's savings, our son's college fund, our emergency account. And instead of gratitude, I got more criticism and demands for additional investments. The final straw came last month at Arthur's 7th birthday party. We'd planned a small celebration at our house, just family and a few of Arthur's friends from school. Jake had spent weeks planning activities and games. He'd built an obstacle course in the backyard, organized a treasure hunt, and even arranged for one of his former students who does magic shows to come entertain the kids. Arthur was so excited. He'd been talking about his birthday for weeks, planning out every detail with Jake. They'd decided on a superhero theme, and Jake had helped Arthur design his own superhero costume. It was one of those perfect father-son projects that reminded me why I fell in love with Jake in the first place. The party was going beautifully. The kids were having a blast with the obstacle course. The magic show was a huge hit, and Arthur was glowing with happiness. Jake was in his element, making sure every child felt included and having fun. Even my mother seemed to be enjoying herself, chatting with the other parents and taking photos. Then came time for presents and cake. Arthur was opening his gifts, and Jake was helping him read the cards. My mother had given Arthur a very expensive electronic tablet, which was incredibly generous, but also completely inappropriate for a 7-year-old. When Arthur thanked her politely, but then got more excited about the baseball glove Jake's parents had given him, I saw Mom's expression change. "Aren't you going to set up the tablet?" she asked Arthur. "It's very advanced. Educational games, art programs. Much more sophisticated than a simple baseball glove." Arthur, being 7, was honest in the way only children can be. "I like the glove better, Grandma. Daddy's been teaching me to catch, and now I have my own special glove." The look on my mother's face was something I'll never forget. Pure disdain mixed with disappointment. But she smiled and said, "Of course, sweetheart," in that tone adults use when they're placating children. After the presents, we moved to the cake ceremony. Jake had ordered a custom superhero cake that looked exactly like the character Arthur had invented. Arthur was practically vibrating with excitement as we lit the candles and started singing "Happy Birthday." That's when my mother decided to have her conversation with Mrs. Peterson, one of the other parents. I was standing right next to them, close enough to hear every word. Mrs. Peterson was complimenting Jake on what a wonderful father he was and how creative the party activities were. "Oh, yes," my mother said in that particular tone she used when she wanted to sound gracious while being anything but. "Jake certainly tries his best, though of course we're not really acknowledging him as family." Mrs. Peterson looked confused. "I'm sorry." "Well," Mom continued, apparently not noticing that I was right there listening to every word, "he's just never really lived up to our family's standards. Teaching is fine for some people, I suppose, but we had hoped our daughter would marry someone with more ambition, someone who could provide better opportunities." My blood went cold. Mrs. Peterson looked incredibly uncomfortable and glanced over at me, clearly not knowing how to respond. But Mom wasn't done. "And of course, Arthur is such a sweet boy, but he's going to need extra guidance to overcome his father's limitations. We're hoping he'll develop more drive than Jake has shown. It's concerning when a child gets too attached to a parent who lacks ambition." That was it. That was the moment something snapped inside me. My son was 7 years old. It was his birthday party, and my mother was standing there telling a near stranger that we didn't acknowledge his father as family, that his father was somehow deficient, and that Arthur needed to be protected from Jake's influence. Jake was across the yard at that moment, helping a shy little girl join the group games, making sure she felt included and welcome. Arthur was showing off his new baseball glove to anyone who would look, proud and happy and completely oblivious to the poison his grandmother was spreading about his father. I excused myself from the conversation and went inside to our bedroom. I needed a moment to process what I'd just heard, to figure out how to handle this without making a scene at my son's party. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. 3 years. 3 years I'd been funding my mother's boutique dream, while she systematically undermined and disrespected my husband. $27,000 I'd invested in her business, while she told people we didn't acknowledge Jake as family. I sat on my bed and did some quick math on my phone. $27,000 was more than half of Jake's annual salary. It was money that could have gone to Arthur's education, to home improvements, to family vacations, to our retirement fund. Instead, it had gone to supporting a woman who had just publicly declared that she didn't consider my husband part of our family. The party ended without further incident. I managed to get through the rest of the afternoon by focusing entirely on Arthur and making sure he had a wonderful day. But inside, I was planning. That evening, after Arthur had gone to bed exhausted and happy from his party, Jake and I were cleaning up. He was his usual cheerful self, talking about how much fun the kids had seemed to have, and already planning ideas for next year's party. "Did you see Arthur's face during the magic show?" he was saying as he stacked chairs. "I thought his eyes were going to pop right out of his head when the rabbit appeared. I couldn't take it anymore." "Jake," I said, "we need to talk." Something in my tone made him stop stacking chairs and give me his full attention. I told him what my mother had said to Mrs. Peterson. I watched his face go through a series of emotions: confusion, hurt, anger, and finally, a kind of resigned sadness that broke my heart. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know she's your mother, and I know you've been trying to maintain a relationship with her. I should have said something sooner about how uncomfortable her comments make me." "No," I said firmly. "You shouldn't have had to say anything. I should have shut this down years ago. I should have protected you and Arthur from her toxicity." Jake sat down heavily on the couch. "What do you want to do?" That's when I told him about the money. All of it. The initial $15,000 and every subsequent loan over the past 3 years. Jake knew about some of it, but not the full extent. $27,000, I said. "I've given her $27,000 while she's been telling people we don't acknowledge you as family." Jake was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What does she need so much money for?" I thought the boutique was doing well. "I don't know," I admitted. "Every time I ask for specifics, she gives me vague answers about cash flow and seasonal fluctuations. But Jake, I'm done. I'm completely done with this." We stayed up until nearly 2 in the morning talking about it. Jake, being Jake, was concerned about burning bridges with my family. He worried about the impact on Arthur, about my relationship with my mother, about whether we were being too harsh. But I had reached my breaking point. My mother had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She had insulted my husband at our son's birthday party in front of other parents while benefiting from thousands of dollars of our money. "She's been taking our money while systematically disrespecting you," I told Jake. "She's been undermining our marriage and potentially damaging Arthur's relationship with his father. This isn't about being harsh. This is about protecting our family." The next morning, I started making phone calls. First, I called my lawyer. We'd used him when we bought our house, and I knew he handled business matters as well. I explained the situation and asked about my options for recovering the money I'd loaned to my mother. "Do you have any written agreements?" he asked. "No," I admitted. "It was all verbal. Family loans, you know? That makes it more difficult," he said, "but not impossible." "Do you have records of the payments? Bank transfers, canceled checks, anything like that?" I did. I'd kept meticulous records of every payment, mostly for tax purposes, since I'd been treating them as business investments. "The first step would be sending a formal demand letter," he explained. "If she doesn't respond or refuses to pay, we can discuss legal action. But I have to warn you, family financial disputes can get very messy very quickly." I told him to draft the demand letter. Next, I drove downtown to the boutique. I needed to see for myself what my $27,000 had bought. Linda's Collections was in a prime retail location, with large windows facing the main shopping street. The store looked successful from the outside. Well-maintained, attractive displays, good foot traffic. I watched for about 20 minutes before going in. Quick pause, fellas. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way. Thanks so much for your support. All right, back to the drama. The interior was beautiful. High-end fixtures, carefully curated merchandise, professional lighting. This was not a struggling business. This looked like a thriving retail operation. My mother was behind the counter, helping a customer select a handbag. She looked up when I entered and smiled, though I thought I detected a hint of nervousness in her expression. Sweetheart, what a nice surprise. What brings you downtown? I waited until the customer left before responding. I need to talk to you about the business, I said. About the loans I've given you. Her demeanor changed immediately. Oh, well, yes. Things are still a bit tight, but I'm optimistic about the holiday season. December is always our biggest month. Mom, I said, I need you to be completely honest with me. How much money are you actually making here? She gave me the same vague answers she always did. Overhead costs, seasonal fluctuations, the challenges of small business ownership. But I pressed harder this time. I've given you $27,000 over 3 years, I said. This place looks successful. Where is that money going? That's when she got defensive. I don't appreciate being interrogated like this. I'm your mother, not some stranger you need to audit. The business is fine. I just need a little more time to get ahead of expenses. How much more time? I asked. And how much more money? Well, she said, and I could see her calculating in her head, if you could help me through the next few months, maybe another 8 or 10,000, I should be able to turn things around by spring. Another 8 to 10,000. On top of the 27,000 I'd already given her, while she told people at my son's birthday party that we didn't acknowledge his father as family. I need to think about it, I told her, and left the store. That afternoon, I did something I probably should have done years earlier. I drove to the county courthouse and pulled the business records for Linda's collections. What I found there changed everything. According to the public records, my mother had incorporated the business 3 years ago, right around the time she'd asked me for the initial investment. But here's the thing. She'd listed herself as the sole owner and operator. No mention of investors or loans. No indication that anyone else had contributed to the business. More interesting were the annual reports she'd filed. Based on her own documentation with the state, Linda's collections had been profitable every year since opening. Not hugely profitable, but solidly in the black. The revenue figures she'd reported were substantially higher than what she'd been telling me. I sat in my car outside the courthouse and stared at those documents for a long time. My mother had been lying to me, not just exaggerating or being overly optimistic about future prospects. Lying. The business was making money, and she'd been using my loans for something else entirely. When I got home, Jake took one look at my face and knew something had happened. What did you find out? I showed him the business records. We sat at our kitchen table and went through everything together. The profitable revenue reports. The discrepancy between what Mom had told me and what she'd reported to the state. The fact that she'd never acknowledged my financial contributions in any official capacity. She's been scamming you, Jake said quietly. This whole time, she's been taking your money while the business was actually successful. The next morning, I called my lawyer again and told him what I'd discovered. He was very interested in the business records and asked me to bring them in along with all my payment documentation. This changes things significantly, he said after reviewing everything. We're no longer talking about failed business loans. This looks more like fraud. He explained my options. I could file a civil lawsuit to recover the money. I could report it to the police as fraud. Or I could try one more time to resolve it privately with a strongly worded demand letter. What do you recommend? I asked. Given that it's family, I'd suggest the demand letter first, but make it clear that if she doesn't respond appropriately, you're prepared to take legal action. Sometimes that's enough to motivate people to do the right thing. The demand letter was delivered to my mother on a Thursday. It laid out everything, the total amount she'd borrowed, the lies she'd told about the business's financial status, and the deadline for repayment. She had 14 days to respond, with either full repayment or a concrete plan for returning the money. She called me that same evening, furious. How dare you send lawyers after me? She screamed into the phone. I'm your mother. Family doesn't threaten family with lawsuits. Family doesn't lie to family either, I said calmly. Family doesn't take money under false pretenses. And family certainly doesn't publicly humiliate family members at children's birthday parties. What are you talking about? Arthur's party, Mom. Your conversation with Mrs. Peterson about how we don't acknowledge Jake as family. There was a long silence. You're taking that completely out of context, she finally said. I was just explaining. You were explaining how you don't consider my husband part of our family while I've been funding your business with thousands of dollars of his money. It's not his money, it's yours. We're married, Mom. We're a team, an actual family. Something you apparently don't understand. The conversation went downhill from there. She accused me of being ungrateful, of choosing Jake over my own mother, of being manipulated by him into attacking her. She said I was ruining her business and her life over a misunderstanding. Pay me back, I said. Pay back the $27,000 you borrowed under false pretenses, and we can start talking about rebuilding our relationship. I don't have $27,000, she shouted. Then we have a problem, I said, and hung up. The 14-day deadline came and went with no response from my mother. No payment plan, no acknowledgement of the debt, nothing. According to my lawyer, that meant we could proceed with legal action. But before we got that far, I decided to do a little more investigation. I'd been wondering what my mother was actually doing with all the money if the boutique was profitable. So I hired a private investigator. I know that sounds dramatic, but I needed to know where our family's money had gone. What the investigator found was both shocking and somehow not surprising at all. My mother had been living far beyond her means. Not just with the boutique, but with everything. She'd been taking expensive vacations that she'd never mentioned to me. She'd bought a new car that she'd somehow hidden from us during family visits. She'd been shopping at high-end stores and dining at expensive restaurants several times a week. More significantly, she'd been gambling. Not just buying lottery tickets, but serious gambling. Casino trips, online poker, sports betting. The investigator found evidence of substantial losses over the past 2 years. My $27,000 hadn't gone to business expenses or even normal living costs. It had subsidized a lifestyle of luxury and gambling that she couldn't afford on her own. When I saw those reports, I felt something I'd never felt toward my mother before. Complete disgust. She had taken money from her daughter's family, money that belonged to her grandson's future, and gambled it away while criticizing the very people she was stealing from. That's when I made my final decision. I called the property management company that owned the building where Linda's Collections was located. I explained that I was considering legal action against my mother and wanted to understand the terms of her lease. What I learned was very interesting. The lease was month to month, not a long-term commitment, and my mother was actually behind on rent. She owed 3 months' worth of payments and was at risk of eviction. That gave me an idea. I met with the property management company and made them an offer. I would pay my mother's back rent and take over the lease for the boutique space. They were happy to work with me since I had better credit and actual assets to back up the lease agreement. The transfer was completed on a Friday afternoon. I arranged for the locks to be changed over the weekend and had an eviction notice prepared for my mother. Monday morning, my mother showed up to open her boutique and found she couldn't get in. The locks had been changed, and there was a notice taped to the door explaining that the lease had been transferred due to non-payment of rent. She called me immediately, screaming so loudly that Jake could hear her from across the room. "What have you done? What have you done to my store?" "I protected my investment," I said calmly. "You borrowed $27,000 from me to fund this business, then lied about its financial status while refusing to pay me back. So I've taken ownership of the business assets to recover my money. You can't do this. This is my store. I built this." "With my money," I reminded her. "$27,000 of my money, which you've refused to repay despite the business being profitable. So now the business belongs to me." It was legally complicated, but my lawyer had assured me that we had a strong case. My mother had used my money to establish and maintain the business, while lying about its financial status. The fact that she was behind on rent just made the transfer easier to execute. The eviction notice gave her 48 hours to remove her personal belongings from the premises. After that, everything in the store would be considered part of the business assets. She showed up at my house that evening with my father. Yes, my father, who I hadn't spoken to in months, and who rarely got involved in family drama. She'd apparently called him in desperation, and he'd driven over to try to mediate. "Honey," he said when I opened the door, "don't you think this is a bit extreme?" "She's your mother." "She's a thief," I said. "She's been stealing from her own daughter's family for 3 years, while insulting and undermining my husband. I'm done enabling her." My mother was crying, which might have moved me a few months earlier. But after everything I'd learned about how she'd been spending our money, after what she'd said at Arthur's birthday party, I felt nothing but anger. "Please," she said, "I'll pay you back. I just need more time. You can't take my store away from me." "You had 3 years to pay me back," I said. "You had 14 days to respond to the demand letter. You chose to ignore both opportunities. So now I'm protecting my family's interests." "What am I supposed to do now?" she asked. "This store is all I have." "You should have thought about that before you decided to gamble away my son's college money," I said. The look of shock on both my parents' faces told me they hadn't known about the gambling. My father turned to look at my mother with an expression I'd never seen before. Gambling? He said quietly. I told them everything the private investigator had found. The casino trips, the online betting, the expensive lifestyle funded by money she'd borrowed under false pretenses. By the time I finished, my father looked like he'd aged 10 years. Linda, he said to my mother, is this true? She tried to deny it at first, then minimize it, then blame me for invading her privacy. But the evidence was overwhelming, and eventually she broke down and admitted it all. I had a problem, she sobbed. I thought I could win it back. I thought if I could just hit a big win, I could pay everyone back and everything would be fine. You stole from your own daughter, my father said. His voice was quiet, but I could hear the anger underneath. You took money from Arthur's future and lost it gambling. I was going to pay it back. With what? I asked. More borrowed money? More lies about business expenses? How long did you plan to keep this going? She didn't have an answer. My father apologized to me before they left. He said he'd had no idea what was going on, and that he'd make sure my mother got help for her gambling problem. But he also said he understood why I'd taken the action I had. She needs to face consequences, he said. This has gone too far. The transition of the boutique business was actually smoother than I'd expected. The existing staff was happy to stay on, and they knew the customer base and operations better than I did anyway. I hired a manager to handle day-to-day operations and focused on understanding the financial side of the business. What I found was that my mother had been telling the truth about one thing. The business was successful. Very successful, actually. The profit margins were excellent, and there was plenty of room for growth. Within 3 months, I'd not only recovered my initial investment, but started seeing substantial returns. The $27,000 I'd loaned to my mother was fully recouped within 6 months of taking over the business. My mother, meanwhile, was struggling. Without the boutique income and unable to access any more of my money, she was forced to confront her financial reality. My father told me she'd entered a gambling addiction program and was working with a financial counselor to address her debts. She'd also lost her apartment. The expensive downtown place she'd been renting was way beyond her means without the additional income stream she'd been getting from me. She'd had to move into a much smaller, more affordable place across town. Part of me felt bad for her. She was my mother, after all, and seeing her struggle was difficult. But every time I started to soften, I remembered Arthur's birthday party. I remembered her telling Mrs. Peterson that we didn't acknowledge Jake as family. I remembered the years of subtle and not-so-subtle criticism of my husband while she was taking thousands of dollars from our family. Jake, being the good man he is, occasionally suggested that maybe we should help her with basic necessities. I don't want you to have regrets, he said. If something happened to her, and you felt like you could have helped, but honestly, I didn't feel guilty. I felt relieved. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells around my mother, trying to manage her emotions while protecting my husband from her criticism. I wasn't lying awake at night, worrying about how much money she might ask for next. The boutique became a legitimate part of my business portfolio. I expanded it into online sales and added a few new product lines. Within a year, it was generating more income than my original marketing business. Arthur noticed that Grandma Linda wasn't around as much anymore, but he didn't seem particularly bothered by it. He was too busy with school and baseball and all the normal activities of a 7-year-old. Jake had never hidden his discomfort around my mother, and I think Arthur picked up on that tension even if he didn't understand it. My father stayed in touch and would update me occasionally on my mother's progress. She was apparently doing well in the addiction program and had found a part-time job at a department store. He said she asked about Arthur and wanted to rebuild the relationship, but he also understood why I needed space. She knows she messed up, he told me. She knows she hurt you and Jake and potentially Arthur, but I also think she's finally starting to understand the real impact of her actions. I wasn't ready to hear that yet. Maybe someday I'd be open to rebuilding some kind of relationship with my mother, but it would have to be on completely different terms. She'd have to genuinely acknowledge the damage she'd done, not just to our finances, but to our family dynamics. She'd have to prove that she understood why her treatment of Jake was unacceptable. Most importantly, she'd have to understand that Jake and Arthur and I were a unit, a family, and anyone who wanted to be part of our lives would have to respect that. The boutique is still running successfully 2 years later. I've turned it into a small chain with 3 locations, and it's become a legitimate business enterprise that employs 12 people and serves hundreds of customers. My mother has never seen a penny of the profits,